I'm not doing this anymore. This is maybe I gotta get used to it. You know what I'm saying? Get some practice in. All right. Are we live? We are. Are we? Hold on. Hey yo, we got a new subscriber, dog. Hey yo, Facade, can you hear
Bro,
me?
for live, yeah, for live, then you gotta, yeah. You know,
Are we? Hold on. I don't know if we're live yet. Oh yeah, we
if you
live.
click,
Oh hey guys, thanks for. Hey yo, we got a new subscriber, dog. Thanks for joining in. That's debatable. I'm producing. Sorry, it didn't go smooth. Facade, can you hear
bro,
me?
for live, yeah, for live, then
Yeah.
you gotta, yeah.
Hey, Grim, do you want to do the intro? Although
I guess
I
I
kind of
can.
already messed it up.
Hey guys, welcome to Now That's Debatable. I'm your host, Fantastic Assad. I am joined with my trusty co-host, Triple A, the Humanist, who has taken on the daunting task of producing this single episode because I'm still in a hotel. I apologize that we are not looking or sounding like normal, but we'll do our best to get back to normal soon. Today we have a very special guest. I think it's pronounced Udahef. Sorry if I pronounced it incorrectly. You can correct me momentarily. And that's what we'll try to go by calling you throughout the episode. And we're going to be talking about anarchy and ending the government. So without further ado, how's everybody doing?
Doing well, man. So
I'm doing well, thank you.
yeah, and so we here to guess to discuss anarchy, and I guess I can start off by saying why I'm opposed to government, and so I'm opposed to government for a lot of the same reasons that I'm a secular humanist. And I think it's immoral. I think any sort of association, any sort of contact, any sort of relationship, it ought to be consensual. So unless you were to have a consensual government, and those seem to be non-existent, I'm opposed to it. That's essentially why.
Okay. So, Prasad, do you want to say something, or do you want me to jump in?
You go ahead, man. It's really unstructured.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
jump in you want. You
it's
can
free.
interrupt.
Yeah, free flow.
Okay.
It's whatever.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm
we'll
because
Cool.
I'm in a
interrupt
hotel.
if we want to say something, and you can
Yeah,
do
Oh,
the
I'm
same.
I'm
sure
in a
that.
hotel, so it's a little. I'm a
Yeah.
little laggy anyway, so I'm going to be doing a lot of listening instead of a lot of talking, hopefully. But with that in mind, I'm also watching our chat because it's live up on the screen. I'll interrupt and ask you guys questions if anybody has any. But feel free to
Sure.
talk it. You do you.
Yeah. So, uh, yeah, I just wanted to real quick say thanks for having me on, guys. I found your channel like 3 or 4 months ago, subscribed, try to listen every
Questions if
week. I think
anybody
it's
has
pretty
any.
awesome. I've been kind of in this debate sphere for about 10 years. Started listening to non-sex show like ages ago, but I don't actually do debates. So you guys are actually, kind of one of the first debates I've really done. So it's kind of nice to get on a good quality channel. But so my opinion, I also consider myself a secular humanist. So I actually come at it from the same approach. But I think that governments are a necessary evil is one way it's described. But I mean, if you think about it, it's more about pragmatism. Um, when it comes to ensuring that people's rights are not being infringed upon, I believe that you need a regulatory state um, to be that intervening factor to make sure that you're able to do what you want to do, but you're not harming other people.
And so that
Um,
that and that works well in theory, but in practice, in most cases, when people's rights are being violated, it's the government that's doing it. You don't have to look too far in history. You can just look at right now, where people are oppressed. It's the government that's doing it. Look at North Korea. Look at China. Look at the Russian Federation. Look at what Albania was. I mean, it's typically government that violates people's rights. Even like the most gross examples, such as the slave trade, that was through government. The Holocaust, through government. The Great Leap Forward, through government. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah,
So
absolutely.
so when it comes to protecting people's rights, typically government does a really shitty job.
Mm,
It's more
Yeah,
likely to kill you than protect your rights.
I mean, you make an excellent point. Most governments in history have been pretty awful. Most governments in the world today are corrupt. They have factions that seek to modify the government to take away rights. So what you're saying is absolutely true.
Even but think about
Um,
this, even like the
yeah,
best example, and I would think like the United States, and I think like there's nowhere else I'd want to live, but this is even United States is very oppressive. Not necessarily to Americans as well, but us. I'm not sure where you are, but as an American, I don't experience much oppression myself from the government. But if I'm living overseas, like for instance, maybe if I was living in Afghanistan or Pakistan or Yemen, where there's American drones flying over my head, blowing up my huts, blowing up my cousins and uncles and stuff, it's a different matter altogether. So even like
sure.
your best case scenarios, it seems that government just doesn't do a good job protecting people's rights. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, oh yeah, I mean, so to continue to concede to that point, uh, governments fail to protect people's rights in a perfect sense. But there is kind of a cliche of it's uh, the worst system except for all the other systems. Um, so where I would kind of get off on my point is how do you solve fundamental issues such as all right, let me put it in a positive sense rather
Okay.
than a question right off the bat. So I believe that the state exists to protect the environment, to protect businesses, and to protect property.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and by property, I mean that can be extrapolated to your will to live, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Basically, the right of life
Yeah, gotcha.
and the freedom to be an entrepreneur, the freedom to be able to pay for groceries, all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
So there's numerous issues that if you don't have a government, they're not necessarily going to be resolved and regulated in a way that is conducive to people's livelihood.
So
So let me.
okay.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, so I think right now the government, when we talked about, I think that the first thing you listed was the environment. So right now the government is doing a very
Mhm.
shitty job protecting the environment. The number one polluters in the world is through government, through the military. Look what the Chinese are doing. They're the island building. They're stealing dirt from Taiwan and dumping it on coastal reefs and like in the middle of the sea. Like it's just a bunch of when it comes to protection of the environment, government usually does a poor job. And the reason that I think that's so is because no one owns it, right? It belongs to everyone. So there's no incentive to take care of it. And this is we saw this like in South America, I think in Brazil, where the government didn't allow these businesses that were chopping down trees and harvesting the wood. They didn't allow them to own the land. So they had a financial incentive to just chop away as much as possible for profit, but there was no incentive to replenish. Why? Because it wouldn't make any money. Because it's not like they
Mhm.
owned the land. They would plant the tree, it would grow, and then somebody else would chop it down, right? So if you were to just privatize it, pull the government out of it, that would be an incentive to take care of the land because you own
Mm,
it.
Got a couple questions
I don't know
from
about
chat.
that.
My
Yeah,
first comments from chat. Can I hop in real quick?
yeah.
Jesse said the slave trade was sanctioned by the government, but it was largely private companies and individuals that carried out the institution. In many places, there weren't even slave codes.
Yeah.
Phantom said, and we can address them both, but Phantom
Okay.
says, without government, how would you solve problems like enforcing workplace safety and food standards, etc.?
Gotcha. So I guess the Jesse's question. I mean, it's not really a question. It was kind of pointing something out that it was private companies that were sanctioned by the state that was carrying out the slave trading. Yeah, I mean that's kind of what that happens. Just like with like most of your weapons that the military builds. I mean, yes, all of them. They come from the private sector. So yeah, the government makes use of the free market to do their bidding. This is a problem of mixing government with capitalism. This isn't a problem with the free market itself. Without government,
So let me jump in there for
yeah.
a second.
Okay.
So um, a major function of the government is to regulate what private individuals or private corporations would be doing. So, I mean, let's do one topic at a time,
Okay. Sure.
and talk
Sure.
about the environment again.
Okay.
So, so one thing, I work in environmental regulation, so it's kind of why I kind of a passion for this. Um, so in North America, or I'm sorry, in the United States, we in 1977, that's when the United States federally recognized the need to protect wetlands for water quality purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, what you had is so much development was taking place that the wetlands were basically in 1977. That's when we all gone to that point within other than 2 or 3 decades. A question right off the bat. So what happened is the government actually stepped in at that point and required permits for impacting wetlands. And that has been built upon since that initial framework in 77 until now. Actually, as of 1995, we have a no net loss of wetlands. And the reason why this is important is that without these wetlands, we basically have very, very poor water quality. We have algae blooms, we have heavy metals in the drinking water, we have fish die-offs, and our governments recognized this, almost 50 years ago, and began to make these changes to protect the environment in this way. And it's a bipartisan issue. It was Jimmy Carter that first he initiated the first executive order to protect wetlands, and it was George H.W. Bush who committed to no net loss of wetlands. And without these protections, private developers would impact all of these areas. And that would cost us billions of dollars, already has cost us billions of dollars in both water quality treatment and profit loss from fish die-offs, tourism loss because of algae blooms, and also water quality projects that we now have to build to try to up our water quality.
Yeah.
I live in Florida, by the way, where this is a main issue. Ron DeSantis, actually, even though I'm not a Republican, he won his first election based on he was going to protect the environment. He was going to up the water quality. So this is across the board. Anyone who's looking at the financial numbers of this issue knows that the environment needs to be protected. And if you leave it up to individual companies or even just landowners who are trying to build a house or whatever, the wetlands are going to be gone. This is why the government needs to step in and create that barrier.
You said why would the wetlands be gone if it was left up to the private sector?
Because a piece of land is more profitable when you clear it of wetlands and you fill the wetlands in and you make it all an upland. However, it costs, I mean, it's hard to
So
put a number on it, to
okay,
be
but
quite honest.
okay, I think there's a premise in your argument that I reject, right? So
Okay.
because so now I had referred to the free market a lot and capitalism a lot, but it doesn't mean that everything someone do is going to be entirely for profit. I don't see any reason why there couldn't be some component of the private sector that's dedicated to preserving the wetlands. Like I live in the DC area. We have this museum called the Museum of the Bible. It's not part of the Smithsonian, doesn't receive any tax money. It's completely private. They have this museum to try to get people to learn more about the Bible and stuff, right? And so that's their thing. I don't see why there couldn't be a private sector that's dedicated to the wetlands and saying, "Hey, this is important. We love this. We love the animals that thrive here, and we're just going to protect it." I don't see why the
Sure,
government
and
needs to
that
be
does
searching for that.
exist. So, I mean, it's funny because it reminds me very much of something that Ron Paul said when he was in the Republican primary. I believe it was 2012 at the time, when everyone was discussing Obamacare and healthcare as a whole. And the issue back then was, well, healthcare costs are soaring because when somebody is injured and they go to the ER, they're required to be cared for. And they don't always have the funding to pay for that care. And so the hospital has to absorb those costs of people not paying. And everyone is trying to come up with an issue this or a solution to this issue, but the libertarian take from Ron Paul was, well, the churches and the charities can care for those people.
So,
but don't you see the
right.
issue with that is that the churches and charities
not
are already.
Can I jump in here? That's not my position. So Ron Paul is a small government libertarian, like a minarchist, and so he wants to have government forcing its will on people for just a few things, and then have the free market do some other things. And so what's going on? So you had this said that the hospital is forced to take care of anybody who it gets, but some people can't afford the insurance. So that this is, you get stuff like this when you have the government and a free market mixing together. So this is going to sound kind of cold, but I don't think a hospital should be forced to take care of anyone. There's a limited number of resources. Also, people have a right to their own body. Like if I'm a doctor and I can treat you, and you just show up in my house or my office or whatever, unless there's some like prior relationship where we establish some like medical responsibility over you, I don't think I should be required to treat you. So I don't think you should be able to just show up to a hospital and then the government forces the hospital to take care of you. So this is not a problem for anarchists. This is a problem for small government libertarians. Okay. That is not my position.
So I didn't mean to diverge onto like the healthcare issue. I do want to get into that, but so I was kind of using that more as an example of the concept of charity coming in and picking up the slack here. Mm-hmm. It just reminded me of that issue. But back to this wetland issue. So there are nonprofit organizations that do try to buy land and they try to preserve wetlands and all of this. But the reason why I brought up George H.W. Bush earlier is because in '96, it was actually a little earlier, while he was running for his election, he committed to no net of wetlands. And the reason is because it's literally every acre of wetland we lose is just, we're bleeding money. We're bleeding money, and we're bleeding the money because the money needs to be used to correct those water quality issues because if you don't correct them, then you have the potential for famine. You have the potential for algae blooms that cause toxicity
Well,
to
to me,
entire cities.
now you've just described the financial incentive. Hey, if you don't protect the whitelands, we're all gonna starve. There's gonna be a famine, right? So like
Yeah,
that's a great
exactly.
that is a great financial incentive
But
for the free market to protect the
but
whitelands.
but but the guy who is trying to build the shopping center is not thinking about that. He's not worried about that because he's worried about his bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't really. He's not a scientist. He doesn't really understand why this needs to
Sure.
be protected. But the people that do understand it are putting a halt on it to say, wait, before you do this, you can still do it, but you need to do it in a way that is not going to affect the millions of people that live in the city that you're doing this in.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's no different than if you want to throw a concert, you know, in your house, let's say. Well, you've got to have an ordinance that protects the people around you so that they're not exposed to an inordinate amount of noise that is going to be harmful to them and their families.
Sure. I mean,
You know,
free market has a way to solve that as well. I mean, we already use those, right?
well, I wouldn't necessarily agree. I would say that if you didn't have noise ordinances, then people would frequently abuse the people around them
No,
and they would gain a profit.
No, HOAs. Like you could just put that in an HOA.
But an HOA is basically a small government in a sense.
Yeah, but it's totally voluntary. It's very different from the government that you're describing that's forced on everyone. So with the HOA, it's a condition of owning this property. It's part of my contract that I voluntarily decided to put myself in. Right? That's not the same
Well, it's no
relationship that I
different
have.
than if you wanted to leave the country or something. I mean, you could do that.
Well,
Or you could leave the state, or you could leave that city.
Okay, but now this is different because we're saying like I can own land, right? I can own my own land, and what you're saying is if I don't follow somebody else's rules, I have to leave it.
Well, it's just what you said about the HOAs.
No, with the HOA, it would be part of the condition. So if we agree beforehand that before I purchase this home, part of the contract is that I join the HOA, that's completely different. But that's not the relationship that the state has. I never agreed to be part of the state or to follow any of his rules. But there are things in America that I own, stuff that I have, and if I don't follow his, I have to either follow his rules or I just have to leave it behind. It's a very different scenario.
Well, suppose you were born into a house that is in an HOA and your parents own it and you don't agree with the rules and you inherit the house. That's essentially what it is. It's no different than you're inheriting the birth area that your parents brought you into when you're born in America or you're born in Jacksonville, Florida, or you're born wherever you're born. You do have the opportunity to leave, but you have some homage to that area. So yeah, it's you want to stay there because that's where you were born.
Yeah, but I don't see it. So go ahead.
Before we get too deep in that, we have quite a few comments. I'm gonna try to get through. So first from Anna, it says, weren't the wetlands already being taken away prior to the government stepping in? The only reason they still exist is because of the government. It's not just theoretical if it was already happening. Jesse said, what incentive would a private company have to protect the wetlands, especially if it's more profitable not to? Do we have just hope that oligarchs like wetlands more than money?
Well, that's the thing. I'll kind of throw this back at you. Like, what incentive would the government has? Because like so I don't know much about the wetlands, but maybe this is one thing that they happen to be taken care of. But I can give you examples of tons of other things that they're not taking care of. So
Anna again commented, isn't the HOA a form of government?
So no, not the way I would define it. So when I talk about government, I'm talking about a state. I'm talking about there's a system, there's this organization that has rules that are involuntary and imposed on everyone else. That's not what HOA is. So HOA is voluntary. It can be part of when you part of the condition for buying a house. It's very different
And
versus
then
a state.
just to continue that same thought, Anna also asked, does the HOA have a private police system set up? Because that sounds expensive.
It could.
All right. And
Yeah.
then onward to Phantom. Phantom is a regular viewer. You know who he is.
Yeah.
It says exactly, relying on a potential famine or whatever seems a bit far. The company's only going to care if it affects the company, but if it affects someone else, they don't have an incentive for it. And then so who enforces contracts? That's
So-
another question by Phantom.
So, and this is going to sound like a 2KK fallacy, but a lot of things we're saying about incentives from the free market equally applies to the government. Like the government may not do it as well, and a lot of times. So, and this is where I like to get the principles instead of just like some of these pragmatic examples, because usually the way these conversations go, right? It kind of turns me into like Batman, right? And what's Batman known for? He's known for having a contingency plan for everything. And so the way the conversation goes, you say, hey, here's just this awful hypothetical scenario. How do we solve this without government? And then I have to give an explanation for that. Then they'll say, oh, what if this happens? And then I have to give an explanation for that. And they're like, what if this happened? What if this happens? And we go down this never-ending rabbit hole of possible catastrophes. And unless I have a contingency plan for every single one of them, then we have to have government. And so that's what I want to kind of get us out of that, that type of thinking, because that's what I'm kind of getting from the comments, because a lot of the problems I'm seeing brought up applies to government. Government overall does a shitty job of taking good care of the environment. They're the number one polluters. Like nuclear testing, right? Dropping nukes in the ocean, dropping nukes out in Algeria, all in Africa, Northern Africa and stuff. I mean, this is stuff that government does. The private sector does very little pollution compared to what we look at the government doing.
So I'm not sure about that one. I actually think that we would have to maybe pull up some research, but I think that the jet line industry is a major contributor of pollution.
Yeah, but sure. As far as the private sector goes, how often do you think the military flies planes?
All the time.
Yeah, like a 24/7.
And not to
no doubt.
Like kind of undercut that point, but hopefully to kind of steelman AAA's argument here is not only how often do they just fly their own planes, but how often do they contract companies to fly things for them? And how often are those private companies doing things for the government? I mean, like when he says the government's the biggest polluter, it's because the government just, if they're not doing it directly, they're paying somebody to do it for them. Like all these huge government contractors, the nuclear maker, like they're like back where we live, there was this company called BWXT. They were a nuclear power facility. That is a direct government contract. They have government people on site that are protecting this building.
Yeah.
But
I got two quick comments I would maybe make about that. One is I would like to get back to your point of principle.
Mm-hmm.
We can do that in a moment,
okay.
Because I actually think that's an important argument on my side, because no government is going to be perfect. Every government is going to have flaws, and some are going to be incredibly corrupt. Mm-hmm. The United States is probably one of the best examples of that, but there are even worse ones. But putting that aside for a moment, because, well, actually, let me just follow up on what I mean there. So the concept of regulation of a state is not what is causing the corruption. I mean, if you have no state, no regulation, then this is going to be done ad nauseum. At
Well,
least when you have the concept of a framework of the state, you can envision a state that is going to have a regulatory system that reins these problems in.
so the no state doesn't mean that it is not regulated or not controlled at all. Like so, like here's a prime example of anarchy. You ever go into your favorite grocery store? You want beans, you know exactly where they are. They're on the aisle with the rest of the beans. You want some rice, you can get that. You want some meat. They got it all organized. Got the chicken over here. You got the beef. You got the pork. This is totally voluntary. No one there is being forced to do anything. People are cooperating because of their mutual benefit. I used to work in a grocery store, so the facade. We worked in like the same chain, but at different sites. It's a store called Piggly Wiggly, and we would help organize the store working there. Why? Because we were getting benefit. We would get paid money for working inside the store, and the store kept us on their payroll because they would benefit from us, doing their deeds by helping organize. It was a mutual beneficial relationship. So it
Regulated by the state, though.
yeah, but
You
it
got
doesn't.
paid a wage.
Well,
You
sure,
had
it doesn't have
workplace
it doesn't
safety
have to be.
regulations.
It doesn't have to be. And as a matter of fact, I would, yeah, I mean, so if there wasn't getting paid a wage, I just wouldn't go there. So let's say it was totally voluntary. Let's say the state didn't exist, and they just say they refuse to pay me. Okay, then I'm not going to work there, and I'm going to work for someone that does, and then they're just going to go out of business because they're not going to have anyone that works for them.
I guess that gets us to like kind of the most obvious, or I guess I would say like, I think that most people, when they think about what life without a state would look like,
Mhm.
I think what comes to most people's heads is
Movie
the
Fury.
lack of the criminality of it. There's no criminal justice system, no criminal regulation, so a lot of people would be working without the consent to work.
So, well, wait. How would they be working without the consent to work?
Well, because there would be nobody saying that everyone has to be paid a wage. People
So,
would essentially be at gunpoint working.
but so okay now. All right, so I could force you to do some work for me. I could show up at your house, point a gun, and do it. I'm able to force you and a few other people to do it. But to rob the entire civilization, that's going to be pretty difficult because I'm dependent on them for services of my own. I'm going to need food. I'm going to need shelter. I'm going to need electricity. I'm going to need a gun and stuff just to keep the threat of violence against you. When you're making a profit, I'm going to need somewhere to keep my money. People are going to have to voluntarily be working with me to provide these things. They're not going to do that with someone if they're threatening them. I'm not going to be able to threaten everybody. That's totally unworkable. The only way that could happen is with government, because people are going to view it. They're going to view it as authentic. They're going to think that I have a right to do it because I'm the government. And
it happens with government, but less. I would say, like it does happen in governments, but at least there is a framework to potentially resolve a lot of those issues, and that's why you're able to work at the Piggly Wiggly and like feel good and everyone's having a good day at work. Versus if you didn't have those regulations in place, it would be miserable, and you would. I mean, there would
maybe
be
or maybe not. So
violence.
That's so okay. So not necessarily. So think about this. Like think about the way that the free market works. Like the same thing that drives prices down drives wages up, and also working conditions up. Competition. Right, so let's say Facade has a store. You're working for him. He's not paying you a lot of shitty conditions and stuff, and so he's over there, getting fat from all this money and stuff. And I say, you know what? I want to jump in the market. I want to compete. How could I get you to leave his organization to come work for mine? Maybe I could pay you more. Maybe I can give you better standards. I can say, hey, I'm not going. Facade does this to you. I'm not going to treat you like that, and you come over to me. And if I don't keep maintaining that, I gotta deal with the risk of somebody else competing against me. So it's the same driving principle. That this is not going to be
I
some
understand what you're
case.
saying. I really think that kind of system that you're describing could only really exist in either a situation
It
where
exists now to like, but just in
I'm-
with. Go ahead. Was that?
I'm just going to hop in because we have a couple more comments. They all
Oh,
seem to be addressing the same question.
Mm-hmm.
So it says, Anna said, but with a representative government, at least, hang on. With a representative government, at least we get a vote where the free market unhindered leads directly to monopolies, which is the opposite of having a voice as an individual. Jesse also contributed, I want to hear how contracts are supposed to be enforced without a centralized body that has a monopoly of force.
Mm-hmm.
And then Phantom also asked, what prevents monopolies?
So so let's talk about the contract thing first, right? So what's a way that let's say there's no government at all, it's just people existing. What's a way that that I could guarantee that a contract could get enforced? Let's think about this. So you heard of escrow? So
Yeah.
let's say this. So let's say I'm going to pay you to build me a house. Now, how do I guarantee that as I'm paying you, like I'm paying you monthly, and you're steadily building this house? How do I guarantee that you don't just take half the money, build me half a house, and be like, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to keep the money in dip? Or how do you guarantee that I just at midway through I say I'm just not going to pay you anymore? Well, it could take some planning. You could do something called escrow, right? And so we could get a neutral third party, get Facade, and both you and I agree. We're going to tell Facade, we're going to give you a fixed amount of money. I don't know, about 80% the value of the house. He's going to code both of our deposits, and now we're going to have this contract. And we got some expert on reading legalese, on being able to read contracts and interpret them in a really good way. And we say, if this private interpreter, if he says that one of us are not upholding our end of the bargain, we forfeit the deposit in escrow.
All right, let me
Tracking?
jump in there for a second, because I think I understand what you're saying. I think it works on short-term projects. I'm very familiar with the concept of when you're hiring a contractor to do a project, you pay them in percentages based on the amount of work that they get done. And then when the work is complete, that contractor wants the 100% of the money. So in my line of work, that works really well because we make sure that they are following codes and calculations and laws, and that somebody comes in and certifies it at the end and shoots elevations and sends in as-built surveys. But if you do not do those things, you don't have those regulations, some of these issues, especially with building codes, they don't even present themselves for 10, 15 years. But you're talking about a structure that actually should last.
Yeah, you could just. You could keep. Okay, so you said 10 to 15. You said 10 to 15 years. You could just keep it in escrow for 10 to 15 years. You don't have to get the money back immediately after the house is built. That's a valid concern.
So
or you can just
I
take
just
out
don't know
insurance.
I don't know any contractor that is going to put something in escrow for 15 years. But supposing even that they would, I mean, like the issue is that if you are these disasters that occur, it's not just about the money. It's not just about, oh yeah, you'll lose 5% of your escrow if the second floor collapses onto the top floor. It's like, well, now like 3 people are dead. Yeah. Like the reason why we have these regulations is to prevent the catastrophes, not just to be like, oh, well, I didn't feel like it. I actually saved money by.
Here's the thing. I could point to you some levees down in New Orleans that the government signed off and said, hey, they're safe.
Army
And
Corps of
instead,
Engineers. I know
instead they
very well about those
crashed.
levees.
Yeah, they crashed, and a bunch of people
Yeah.
died. So this,
Sure.
I'm not trying to give you heaven on earth here. Neither anarchy nor the state does this, but only one of
Right.
them is involuntary, and that's yours. That's the state.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I would say that there are many things that would be involuntary that would happen to you if there wasn't a state. One, criminality would be rampant. I just
Not
have a
necessarily.
list of things that I typed up right before here.
So
Not even about just agricultural.
mhm.
In 1935, President Roosevelt signed the Soil Conservation Act because there was a Dust Bowl disaster, and this was caused by poor agricultural practices. The government then incentivized farmers to plant trees and to rotate crops, and this created the robust agricultural industry that we have in the United States today, as opposed to
but
in the early
here's the thing.
1930s.
The government did not
Um,
invent the idea of rotating crops. This is something that farmers knew for thousands of years because you're going to exhaust the soil by
But
planting the
they-
same thing over and over again.
but-
You had said earlier that without the state there would be excess criminality. And so government creates criminality. For like the black market, like for instance, like we see like all of this crime surrounding
yeah.
drugs, like drugs and like the gangs and stuff around it. This is a result of the
Yeah.
government. It wouldn't be
True.
it wouldn't be a black market. People wouldn't be fighting over territory to sell drugs and killing each other if it wasn't for the government outlawing it. You know why? Because they would have access to the free
100% agree
market.
with
Yeah, so and they could take legitimate. They could take their have legitimate ways of protecting their land to sell their drugs or sell their stuff. They wouldn't have to kill each other over it.
Well,
The
so
government-
I agree with
the
you
government
100% on that one.
creates the government. So I'm not saying all criminality will go away here, but a lot of the criminality that exists because of government. Not to mention there's also government just directly funding cartels and funding drug lords, which is pretty rampant. So like
all I would
this
say is I'm
equally
glad that
applies
you
to
come a
government.
little bit over to my side, because I mean, exactly. I feel like you're coming to my side, because if you want to argue where the line is of regulation, should it be a little bit to the left? Should it be a little bit to the right? There's so much room for argument on every single sector
No,
of regulation.
That's not how I'm approaching it. So I'm approaching it so like would give someone the right to regulate something as them having some sort of ownership over it. And so here's the difference between Facade, you about to say something?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in again just
Oh, yeah.
because AAA, you're doing a lot of talking,
Mhm.
and I'm trying to make it even of where I cut people off between you and him, but you're talking probably 40% more than he is. So I'm jumping in.
Okay.
With that in mind, Anna says, but no, we already got past that one. Anna says, or your dad can invest a lot of money in your business so you can undercharge at a loss until you drive the competition out of business, like Jeff Bezos and Amazon. No government says welcome Hatfields and McCoys. And then Jesse says, doesn't that only work if you both agree what the expert says? If one person doesn't agree, doesn't it just boil down to who has the bigger guns?
No, well, so
And then one more,
okay,
one,
all right.
one more, because they're directly related. Anna says, agree with Jesse. Anarchy leads to whoever has the most force available with no recourse. Government inherently has the most force, but we get a say in that.
Sometimes.
And then one more from Jesse says, who's the arbiter of what?
Okay.
Who owns what?
So all right. So the
So
first one.
let me just jump in really quick,
Okay.
if I can.
All right.
So, I mean, you're making an excellent point that the government is complicit in a lot of the criminality. They're complicit in, deforestation of the rainforest that you mentioned in Brazil. However, you might want to look into Lula, who is more interested
Yeah, I'm
in
not saying
protecting
everything the
rainforest
government
and
does is
got
bad.
elected.
But
No, of course not. But all right. So I mean, I guess what the point comes down to is when you're weighing what is going to work better.
Mhm.
I mean, I think it's clear that you need some type of a regulatory state, or else you're just going to have anarchy, which I know is a good positive connotation for
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
So,
Without government, you're not going to have government.
but
That's the way it works.
so I would like to take the conversation in a different direction and
Go to principle.
talk more about those principles that
Yes.
you're interested
Before we
in,
do that, can
because
we?
I think even there, yeah, go ahead.
Before I
Sure,
like
go
to
ahead.
address some of the points because people raised some good points. They said, or your dad can invest a lot of money in your business so you can undercharge at a loss until you drive all the competition out of business. And so so like you can do that temporarily, but you can't do it forever. So like you may put me out of business, and maybe you do it for a while, and maybe I lose interest in getting back into whatever Amazon was doing, and then I do something else. But I mean, somebody else is going to come along and then start competing. Like you can't just run at a loss infinitum, or otherwise you're just going to defeat the purpose. There's always as long as there are people existing in which Amazon is depending on, then there's going to be the possibility of people jumping into the market and competing with you. So you can't just continuously drive at a run a net loss here. Also, doesn't that only work if people agree on what the expert says? And so no. And I had said with the arbiter who's going to interpret the contract, I said that we're going to agree about his interpretation. So we don't have to agree with what he says. We got a guy. We looked him up. We said he's pretty good at what he does, and we agreed that he gets the final say over it. That's what I meant. Anarch leads to whoever has the most force available with no recourse. No. Well, I mean, it could, but that's exactly what the government does, right? It leaves government right now leads to whoever has the most force. We see that right now between my relationship in the state and also the state's relationship with other states. Like look on an international scale, the people with the countries with the most force get what they want. That's just kind of the way things works. The arbiter of who owns what, that's really complicated. And so I'd like to I'll tell you this, Jesse. Good question. Really good question. And I can't take up the entire episode to describe that, but it's a complex system. The way that could work. If you want to come on the show, we could talk about that. But yeah, but deciding who owns which patch of dirt is kind of complicated. So you would I want to get to the principles. I just want to address those comments first.
Sure. Sure. Go ahead. Yeah, I want to hear what you you are, in principle opposed
the
to
principles. So the principles is that I own my body, I own my stuff, and so I get to do what I want with it as long as I'm not violating someone else's rights. Right? So no one has a right over it. So let's say we're me and you we're going on a hot date, and you're like, you know what, I'm Triplette, I'm trying to tap that ass or something like that, like I'm trying to hit that, right? And I'm like, nah, I don't want to, right? You don't have any authority over my body. I can just tell you no, right? What if you and Facade was together and you decided that you both decided that you wanted to have a right over my body? Would it now be okay? No, right? What if you and 3 people got together and said, we want to control Triplette's body? Would it now be okay? What if you in the entire continental United States got together and said, we want to control Triplette's body? Would it now be okay?
No. I mean, I can't think of any circumstances.
Right.
What I mean, I can think of maybe a very small handful of circumstances where like bodily autonomy would be, Like if they have some kind of a search warrant on you and they can draw your blood without your consent or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
In very rare circumstances, like you committed a serious crime and like a DUI, manslaughter or something. Even then, though, I think that generally government protects your right. So at the minimum, you get to argue it in court that that evidence should be
here.
excluded.
So because we're talking about consent and what gives people consent, right? And I just saw Anna's comment. She said, "Yes, that's why I finished my comment with saying with the government, the difference is we get a say. No, you might get a say, you may not. Most of the things that the government does, you do not get a say in. Like for instance, like we just put a bunch of new bases in the Philippines at the request. You had no say in it, like no control over it whatsoever. Where the military did a huge exercise last year called Defender 24, had no say in it. So like the vast majority of the things that the government do, you have no say in it.
So let me just jump in there because I think that the principle that you're having or that you're stating is the same one that I have. So I believe consent is part of it.
That is my entire principle. Because if I do not consent,
I don't think you can. So I agree that that's an important principle. However, you also listed another principle, which is that you cannot infringe on the rights of other people. And I think that's the reason why you generally do need a regulatory state, because if you don't have one, you're going to inevitably have people infringing on the rights of other people. And this just starts at the very most basic level. But let's just think of just to really, again, bring it back to the environment for a second. You live in a state, let's say you live in Oklahoma, and you have a river that runs from Oklahoma to Texas. And you have a landowner who lives in Texas, and he's downstream of your river that is in Oklahoma. Well, if you pour a bunch of your waste from your dry cleaning company into the river, that is going to absolutely ruin this person down the road from you. He no longer has the same river that he used to.
3 letters.
You understand? So this
3 letters.
Sure.
HOA. you could just add that. Oh,
an
we can add whatever you want
across
to.
State and but you can let's create an HOA that goes across the entire nation.
So you can.
I'm sorry, but that sounds exactly identical to a government. That's the reason I'm being.
No, it's not. So it's very different because I'm talking about I said HOA kind of jokingly, but I'm talking about you living next to a river. There's obviously concern about doing damage to the river and harming other people. So you could say with condition upon owning this land, there are certain rules that you're gonna have to follow. That's something that we do right now. Like I could sell you a car and I could put in the contract that there are limitations that you can do with the car. Like you can't. I'll say like you can't.
Dean Atheist, he joined us. I was just saying hi, Michael.
Okay, give 1 second before you speak because of the prism disconnected. I think it's back.
I got a little lag, but.
Oh, you know what? It's back up. Okay, go ahead.
So it sounds like a lot of what you're saying is let's just address these concerns after the fact and let's just all sue each other. That's one way of handling it, but the way cheaper, more economical way of handling it is to put a regulation in place that says don't do this in the first place, because we've seen what happens and we've learned from our mistakes.
So no, that's not a good way to do it. You don't just make a rule like it's a bad idea to just make a rule and just say, hey, don't do this. What you want to do is you want to create an environment to give people an incentive to do it.
I agree.
Okay, all right.
I agree with you. So like we are agreeing on the principles. So I think that the best way to, like, let's take climate change, for instance. There's many ways that the government can create incentives for entrepreneurs to address climate change in their businesses. For instance, when you introduce a regulation, it doesn't shut out business like a lot of people think. What it actually does is it creates a new niche for new businesses and new entrepreneurs, new inventors to come up with novel solutions to that idea. So for instance, when you, again, this is my background, but when you protected wetlands, you had people come up with ideas of how can we around this wetland regulation? Well, we can create new wetlands. We can create wetlands in a giant mitigation bank and sell credits. And that way people can impact their wetland over here and they can pay me over here. So it's not contrary to, maybe what some people think. When you create these regulations, it's not hindering people's ability to innovate. It's not hindering people's ability to conduct business. It's actually creating new niches, and it's creating a stable environment so that businesses and consumers can live together in a way going to work for everybody, as opposed to just a few corporations at the top kind of running away with everything and then leaving a economical, environmental, and consumerist disaster for all of the people who are just working and
I guess it would depend on what the regulation. There are some regulations that would bar other people from getting into it, just because like the cost, just the initial cost may be so high, like it just can't get into it,
Sometimes,
but yeah,
sometimes
it's the case. But and now to go, I want to come back to this principle, like if consent, right? We have to get past that. Because or we can't go anywhere. Like, it's government, the way it operates, it needs money. If people was voluntarily giving money to it, then I'd have no problem with that. But that is not the way states operate. They claim a right to it. They'll draw circles around a piece of dirt and they'll say, I don't own this, I just control it. People who do own parts inside of it, they have to follow my rules or they have to leave their stuff behind, right? And so the difference between a consensual relationship and government is, like, I could say, you're working with me, you're working for my business, I can say follow my rules or you can't access my stuff, like my payroll, you can't come in my shop or whatever. The government says follow my rules or you can't access your stuff. You see the difference? So if you don't follow my rules, you're not allowed in my house. If you don't follow the government's rules, you're not allowed in your house.
I think that makes for an excellent bumper sticker.
Say it again.
It makes for an excellent bumper sticker or like a real quick slogan.
Right.
But I think that all the things that we've been talking about tonight, the reason why they're possible is because of that regulatory state. And the people who are going to complain about taxes are likely the ones who are benefiting the most from these pieces that are these regulations that are creating a functional society for us to live in. For instance, I mean, if you have a business, you're paying a lot of taxes usually, right? Actually, not really. I mean,
that's kind
usually
of an ad hominem, though,
right?
But regardless of who they are, but it's an
no,
point.
it's not an ad hominem.
Okay.
No, it's not an ad hominem at all. What it is saying that you're using the infrastructure to run your business, and then you're turning around and saying, well, I don't want to pay taxes. Run your business. I get what you're saying, but the thing is, you're kind of like taking the candy and then not wanting to pay for it. You know what I
No,
mean?
no,
You're
what?
not
No, no,
moving
I'm
out of the
not. No, no,
country and
I'm
moving
not at
to a
all.
country with
No,
no
no, 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 no,
taxes.
no,
Yeah,
no,
but
no.
that would be fine.
I'm not
But
taking the candy and not wanting to pay for it. Like I'm rejecting the candy and saying I don't want it at all. Like it's being shoved down
are
my
you
throat.
are you rejecting the candy when you're using all of the infrastructure
So,
that the society is
r-
collectively built
so,
up?
so right now I don't have a choice. Right, I live in a state that I work in cybersecurity. I pay, not bragging, it just happened to be the case. I pay more in taxes than most people make. Right, I make pretty good money in what I'm doing. Right, but that has nothing to do with it. They have no, if even if I was only making being taxed a penny, if I don't want to have to pay any of it, I shouldn't have to because it's mine. When I when
You
I
don't
when I
have
get
to.
on a public road and use it, it's because they have a monopoly on the roads. No, I have no other road to drive on because the government made it so where they own at
So
least the majority of
if
the
there was
roads.
no, let me ask you a question.
Hmm.
If there was no government, and every time you wanted to go down the road to do something, and there was a guy sitting there with 10 machine guns, and he wouldn't let you pass until you paid him 1 penny,
Hmm.
what are you going to do to stop him? Are you going to start to create a new state that makes things a little bit more
Well,
fair
no,
for
but
you?
that's a fabulous scenario. That's I can't even imagine how that would happen in society. I could see
It used
that
to happen
happening.
all
Well,
the
I
time.
can,
I could see that
I
happening
can,
in government. Med,
It happens
I
in
can.
go ahead,
South
Fasad.
America, actually, frequently.
Go ahead, Fasad.
I was gonna say I can. I can actually tell you how that happens. It's in short, it's called the government being in control of the state highways, and if you want to travel on those particular highways, you have to pay a toll. I have to do it twice a day going back and forth to work. And if I don't pay that toll, they send me a fine. And if I don't pay those fines, they take away my driver's license and say I can't drive a car.
You know the
That's
funny thing
literally how
about
it works.
toll highways, at least the way they work in where I live in Florida. Um, the reason why we have toll highways in Florida, like the Florida's Turnpike, is because we rejected federal funding for those highways. So they would be free, but the government actually makes more money by charging tolls, and then they were profits to use for fixing up the highways and stuff. When you drive down Florida,
In good shape.
when you drive down I-95. So I
Is that
mean, like that's kind of the
shape?
nuances of the government. I mean, but it actually it's funny because if it were run by a bigger government, it actually wouldn't have a toll. But
Let me ask you something.
we're able to make it nicer because we charge a toll. It's that's the only reason we have toll highways in Florida. I don't know about in DC
I don't know.
or where you
I'm
guys
breaking up
are
here.
located.
Is that road in good condition?
Oh, the turnpike is in great condition.
Would you say it's in better
I-95, which is
condition than the free
federal.
roads?
Yeah, it's in better condition than I-95, which is federally funded. But I-95 is free, so most people just take that one.
Oh, okay. Thing is, if you privatize the roads, you'd have a better system that the tolls help pay for. Government, when free, doesn't actually the same quality of road as the privatized.
Sure. So like when you are living large and you got a little extra money in your pocket, maybe you'll jump on the private road. But for most people, it's probably easier to take the I-95 to work and back because the government can do things a little cheaper as collective. But it's granted, it's not as nice. So a little bit of give and take there, and we'll acknowledge give and take, we can figure out where that line should be. It's just when you're saying the government, it's not really clicking with me, like not getting how
On my end because it's but I am on terrible internet. I will try to watch the video and see.
I don't know who froze right there. Both of y'all froze. I heard nothing. Um,
Well, your internet
Oh, both.
went down.
oh, okay, my bad. Go ahead.
Can you hear me at least?
Yeah, I can hear you now. You have well what were you saying?
Okay.
No, I was asking you to
Me?
continue.
Oh, I was saying.
I
Okay, sorry.
I like to jump in here. So like back like to the road example. So like again like what he was saying with tolls, even if like even if without the tolls, like they're paid through tax money. Try not paying your taxes and see what happens to you. Like it's just gonna get taken from you. Like in a private
yeah.
system, like it would
Well,
be
of course.
it would be voluntary. And if you don't want to use the road, then you can just not use them, and then you wouldn't be forced to pay for them either. So like that, I mean that's the way that would work. It would.
Why
It
do
would
you
just
think it would be? Why do you think it would be voluntary? Sorry, I don't even talk over you. It's interesting. I was just going to ask, why do you think it would be voluntary? Like we know instances where, like for instance, New York City, the mob, you know, they
So
had
the
organized crime.
I
It was
want
not voluntary whether you paid the mob.
to. So this is an awful example because the mob is a creation of the state. The mob went into the black market, which exists only because of the state. They were doing things
Well,
that the state outlawed. Mainly, like so. Yes, they were killing and all and some stuff like that. But like most of the stuff we're doing, they were selling alcohol and drugs to people. That's the result of the state. The mob wouldn't be able to do that
so
and have no reasons to
so
kill people over it if it wasn't for the government.
so if you had basically a gang come up to you and say, "We're going to protect you from ourselves as long as
You're
you pay
describing.
us."
Are you describing the government right now? Because or are you? What do you do?
No,
What do you mean?
no,
Okay,
because
it's
so the
ironic because
government,
that's literally
the
what the government
difference,
does. You pay
so the
taxes
difference is
or you're
that
going to
you
jail.
can, at least theoretically, you can have a better government um, if you have a democracy. Now, I'm not saying that every democracy is perfect. In fact, quite the opposite. No democracy is perfect. But
But that,
what
but that's
the
not that's the
alternative is, how are you going to stop? How would you address the common like
thug.
concern that's going to come to everybody's mind if you get rid of the government?
Hmm.
What are you going to do about like criminals, gangs, and people that just want to come in your house and take your stuff? I mean, what are you
Gotcha.
going to do with it?
Cool. So all right. So like all right. So most of the things that the when we look at like organized crime like with gangs, and that's mostly what they do is just mostly just organized crime. Most of that stuff would just go away once the government does, because it would just now be part of the free market. Now you don't have to kill each other over it. You can do legal. You can just do. You have legitimate ways to resolve this. We can draw up contracts. You can get people to enforce them, and it's a lot cheaper than shooting each other over it. Now that's just their only means to resolve disputes.
All
So
right, question,
that would
hypothetical
completely go away.
situation.
Go ahead.
Let me ask you a question. So I'm rich. Let's pretend, because
Mhm.
it's definitely not true. But I hire a private security guard to protect my house, right? So I'm good, right?
Mhm.
But then some guy walking down the street is not trying to rob me. He's just walking down the street. And private security guard gets whatever, hot-headed, and pulls the trigger on this guy and unalives him.
Mhm.
Where is the possibility of justice going to come from in this system? Because granted, our system is notoriously imperfect for solving these types of problems,
Mhm.
but there have been some progress as far as people in positions of authority,
So
unaliving other
you're
people.
talking about like so you're talking about like there's some sort of like law enforcement officer and he shoots somebody that shouldn't have been shot. Is that what
A
you're talking
private
about?
security guard. In your situation, that's who they would be, right? It would be a private security guard, right?
Yeah.
Like if I want protection, I need to hire a private security guard. By the way, I can't afford. But let's say he
Why
just,
wouldn't he be able to afford them? So
you
like
know,
so here's the thing. So like I have private security in my neighborhood. They don't come right out of my pocket. The community pays for it.
got a government. You got a government.
No,
That's
it's not. It's
why.
not a
That's why
government.
it's
The community.
affordable for you.
No, it's not. So the community is paying for it. So like, let's say you. So instead of me just paying one security guard out of pocket, let's say the three of us live in a neighborhood and we just split the cost. That's what's happening. So we have the same thing.
So you're
it's not
beginning
like,
to form a small government.
no, it's not.
That's what that is.
No, it's because it's voluntary. Because if you don't want to pay for the security guard, you don't have to.
You can move.
No,
You have
you
to
don't
move.
have to move. You can just not do it because you have a right to own your. You have a right to your stuff. So, and in the scenario with government, I have to pay for it regardless of how shitty his service is. The cop, let's say the security guard goes around, start shooting people, start planting drugs on people. I still gotta pay his bill. I still gotta pay his payroll. I'm still
Question
paying
for
his
you.
rent and all that kind of stuff. I have no say in it. The government is forcing me to do it despite providing awful service. And this is what happens with police. This wouldn't happen with private security.
So you live in a neighborhood of 3 houses, right? Little cul-de-sac.
Mhm.
House 1 and house 2 are like, well, let's split the cost of a private security guard. And house 3 is like, nah, I'm not going to pay. So as somebody, let's say that there are criminals out there and one wants to come into the cul-de-sac. Is he going to look at house 1, be like, oh, that one's got a security guard. House 2, oh, that one's paying his dues. Oh, house 3, I'm going to attack this one. That's not how it works.
I can jump in here. So like, yes, you could do that. And matter of fact, there are fire departments now that do similar things. Like this lady, she didn't pay her annual fee for the fire department. Her house caught on fire. Fire department showed up, realized what happened, and they just watched it burn down. So, yeah.
But have you ever had a house blazing down next door to you? What do you think that does to your housing costs? Your home rates are going to plummet as a result of the blazing house next to you pouring soot over onto your house.
Yeah, I mean, you could get insurance for that. So, I mean, here's the thing. And so now, this is what we're doing now, what I was afraid we would do 30 minutes ago. We're going into this scenario where, like, you come up with a scenario, I give you a way the free market can solve it, and then you just come up with scenario after scenario.
Because it doesn't work. That's why. It's because there's too many scenarios.
But what's going on is like you want me to have a contingency plan for every single thing. I gave you one for that. You said the soot falls in somebody's house. Okay, insurance. What if the insurance not available? What if the insurance company
think about how
like
a car
works? What if it
works.
doesn't like black people or something? We can do this all day.
Yeah.
Right, and
because think about how a car engine works, man.
I can point out to you instances of the government failing in very similar scenarios. It doesn't get us anywhere. It's still not okay to violate people's consent.
The reason why you have to have a contingency in place is because these are real things that happen. Think about when you're driving a car. Your car, if you didn't have a radiator, your car would overheat. If you didn't have an alternator, your car wouldn't be able to start the next time you try to start it. If you didn't have
hey, you don't have to give me 1 second.
Oil, your car would grind and it would overheat again.
You'd have 1 second. Hey, Fasad, can you take over? I'll be back in 1 second. I gotta text my wife really quick.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll be back in a minute.
Yeah, so AAA and I don't actually necessarily agree on the topic. I'll read out a couple comments real quick, and I'm sure AAA will address them accordingly. But only if you can afford to live in a community that has those accessories. If you can't afford security, then you're screwed. How do you have a right to your stuff? HOA can just take it and kick you out. The answer to surviving anarchy is simply to have endless cash. Just to address a few of the comments, because it seems that there's a misconception here, and it may help clarify for not only you to have, but also the viewers, is that a lot of these things that are in place now, or a lot of these questions and these scenarios that we keep coming up with over and over again, because you can come up with an infinite number of them, just like Triple A was saying, is still assumptive of like a government, or that a government had to be in place. Like the problem is you're only, I think, and I'm not going to say only, but the problem is that you come up with these scenarios, these like wild and crazy scenarios, and you're like, oh, well, thank God we have a government. But in reality, like, it's mainly because the government kind of forced things to be the way they are as to why some of these contingency plans even have to be a situation. Because it's the government that's kind of forced people into certain ways in certain situations. If you had started with a completely free and voluntary market at the beginning, then you probably wouldn't have nearly as many of these contingency and questions. But the problem is, I don't know Anna, but I know Jesse, like on a first name basis, and he's a good friend of mine. I know for a fact that he's at least used to live under the American government and was forced to comply to American standards. And the problem that people have when they do that is that's kind of all they've ever known. Versus if you just take and start with a blank slate and say, I want a society that is built on consent. And then we start making rules and plans accordingly. You stop thinking about these contingency plans of, what if my house burns down? Well, in a consensual society, it's not about endless cash or wealth, etc. And by the way, you say wild and crazy, endless scenarios are not wild and crazy. They happen every day. Like, well, yeah, but again, we're going back to my point of a lot of these things are the way they are because the government kind of forced them that way. When I say like a house burns down and a house burns down next to you, and you're like, well, what do we do if this person didn't pay their bill? Well, what do you do right now if you don't pay your electric bill? Your lights get turned off.
Right.
What do you do now if you don't pay taxes? The government takes you to jail. Like, so it's not like you're wild and crazy scenario. I could come up with way worse scenarios of things that the government's going to do.
That's exactly what I was going to say. And
we could play the contingency game all day if we wanted.
And
however,
it wouldn't even be contingency
I just want to point out.
I
really want to point out that if you take a step back and you don't go deep into this like idea of like the government has to be there to solve all my problems because without government it's chaos. There's a difference in anarchy and chaos, and that's something.
So I got two points I'd love to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of those is that if you can't pay your rent, if you can't pay your taxes, if you can't pay for groceries and stuff, well, that's one thing that has on you, like in a sense. I mean, I don't think that's the end all be all, but at least you can have some sense of responsibility for that. But if your house is dropping in value because the guy next to you didn't want to pay for
I'm gonna cut
the
you
fire
off
department.
Hold on, I'm gonna cut you off real quick. Your house isn't dropping in value because your next door neighbor didn't pay his fire thing. If your next door neighbor's house burns down and somebody who can afford to pay for insurance against fires builds a new house, now your profits just went up. It sounds
That's just
terrible.
not how the housing market works, though.
Well, no. Like here's the thing: you're not living outside of your means in markets right now. You're not able to do that now. Why do you think that would change if I took away the government? You think all of a sudden everybody's going to be millionaires, right? Like that, or all of a sudden everybody's going to be broke. Like that's not the way it works.
No, but
like,
so the other thing is, I mean,
to the wind.
I'm sorry. All right.
No, I mean it's just like you're taking these concepts and throwing caution to the wind. Like right now, there's like the richest neighborhood in Rhode Island, in the world, or in the United States, is in Rhode Island. You cannot afford to live there unless you are a multi-millionaire. I cannot afford to live there because I am not a multimillionaire. Guess what you don't get to do? Go build a house in there that's just a piece of junk that's going to fall apart and ruin these people's housing market value. It's not possible because they have the market locked on it. And guess what you could do? Go build a house in the slums that's a mansion. But you probably wouldn't do that either, right? That doesn't make any sense. So, like,
you build a house in the swamp, you're going to be negatively affecting the water quality.
And
like,
what you're
we
saying,
wouldn't let you do
is
that.
the biggest
The wetlands.
polluter of the water is the government. And if we got rid of them, you'd get rid of the biggest polluter of water, right? Wouldn't that help the water quality?
No. I disagree, because, you know, I think that we think of the government as this enormous entity that just towers over all of us, but really, what drives the government is the people. The reason why the American United States government is so big is because there's 300 million people living in the country. And believe me, I see what these people do as far as development every day. I regulate development, and I see what they propose. I see what they get approved for. I see a lot of it. And if we didn't have regulations in place, this place would be a parking lot, literally the entire state, all the way down to Key West.
I don't know how you can say that. Like,
bruh, like, let me, if I kill everyone in the, who's going to buy from that mega market lands?
The people that are forced to live here in your new miserable
No. You missed the first half because I'm on hotel Wi-Fi and breaking. Kill everyone in the state of Florida to buy from the mega mart in the wetland.
Oh, if you're a serial killer, then yeah, chances are you're not going to do well. Sorry, I'm missing the point of what you're saying.
And then I built a mega mart, just asshole around.
Right. Okay. But the problem is that here's the thing that we need to remember about corporations. So think about this. When it comes to corporations, they don't typically calculate things on a 50 or 100 year or 150 year time scale, or even a 20 or a 10 year time scale. A lot of times, what you have is somebody who comes in and develops a plan, and they realize they're going to make a bunch of money off of the plan, and they're out. They're out in 4 or 5 years. They've already made their money. They're gone. The next person inherits the property, and then they live there for X amount of years, or they run that shopping center for X amount of years. They're also making their money, and they're gone. Like, so it's short-term profits are taking precedent over a long-term economical strategy. And that is one of the major reasons why we need regulation, because you don't want a contractor buying a piece of property, developing it, and then piecing out.
I want to add something real quick, and it's just because I like to be factual. That someone said the biggest wetlands in Florida are developers and private corporations. Yeah, that is a blatantly incorrect statement. If you just Google it, 69% of the wetland pollutions come from stormwater runoff due to subsidized farmlands and pesticides that are government controlled.
Subsidized.
You said private, right?
Subsidized by governments for pesticides and fertilizer.
Yeah. So they are subsidized, but those lands are owned by private companies. They're
subsidized by the government.
But that's the thing.
They're subsidized by the government.
That's the thing. They wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the government subsidizing.
The government's padding their pockets.
That's the problem I'm talking about blending government in with the free market. You get stuff like this.
I mean,
and then we're blaming and we're completely blaming the free market for the pollutants. No, it's the government.
No one's blaming the free market. No one's blaming the free market. I actually believe in the free market. But if you don't have regulations in place, the free market can't function. I know that sounds maybe contradictory if you believe that the free market needs to be 100% regulation free, but that's actually not the best way to run a free market.
Because the black market is just the free market. That's all it is. but it's just outlawed. And so now it has to.
Mm,
But that's exactly what it is. You said the black market's not the free
I
market.
don't know about if I agree with
Really,
that. I mean, I
you wanna
kind of
buy
I'm
drugs.
understanding your sentiment, but
That's exactly. I
so
don't see how I'm wrong about
the
this.
free,
You and let's
well,
say Facade and
so the
I both
reason
are
why
providing
these
illegal services.
so actually that commenter's point, the reason why there are a few very powerful agricultural companies that have a lot of land in Florida. Let's talk about Disney World. Talk about Sugar Farms Co-op. Let's talk about Dixie Crystals. The reason why they have those properties is because they purchased them before there were regulations. Now we have to accommodate those companies and grandfather them into our current regulation system. If a company tried to come in and do that now, we'd be like, no, you've got to
So,
mitigate for the
but this
destruction that you are doing to
and
the
so
environment.
this is part of the thing you're doing. So like and so that now we're trying to blend the free market in with government, and that's how you get stuff like this. Like we talk about like people talk about like privately run prisons, right? Because if you look at a lot of the lobbyists who are opposed to the legalization of drugs, they're 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 lobbyists for the private prison industrial complex. Why? Because there's a financial incentive to get inmates in there. So if you reduce the amount of laws,
So what it would be like if it was only private? If it was only private
okay, if it
and
was only
we just
private,
had mobs of people that threw people in there, I mean,
so I mean,
one example
no,
I
what
had to bring up, and I okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I actually wrote down an example of something I think that kind of works in your favor, but I think in the end, it kind of proves my point. Um, so when it comes to the criminal justice system, in 1955, Emmett Till was killed at 14 years old by a neighborhood of people that lynched him.
Yep.
They believed he committed a crime
And then
by whistling at a white woman.
which isn't
And then,
yeah, it wasn't a crime, but yeah, they thought
yeah,
he did
they
it, so that's
believed
why they
he
killed him.
committed a crime.
Mhm.
And so then those people that did that to him were taken to court and they were all acquitted
Mhm.
of murder by an all white jury. And that shows that the criminal justice system is flawed. It's
Well, yes, yeah.
clearly not capable of creating justice in every situation.
Well, not in every situation, no.
And that mob system of justice was also flawed. So, but after Emmett Till was murdered, it started a revolution that led to the Civil Rights Act, and we still don't have justice in this country. However, in 2020, Ahmaud Arbery was killed in Georgia, and it was it was compared to Emmett Till. He didn't actually commit a crime. He was killed by this mob justice, and the three people that killed him, are now serving life sentences. So it shows that
So
the
that's
criminal
not
justice system
so
can
okay.
evolve,
All right. So
but the concept of
all right.
anarchy and lynching
No,
will never
that's
evolve.
not anarchy. And so and I want to be clear here. So I'm not trying to say how we could establish heaven on earth. I'm not trying to prevent all bad things from happening, right? So like you have in my perfect voluntarianist anarchist world, let's say you're walking down an alley, someone beats you up, take all your shit, and you don't know who it was. What do? Well, nothing. Like, you're kind of out of luck. So like bad things are going to happen. That that's just the way it is. What I'm arguing that is that government in itself is illegitimate because it violates consent. It has no right to my stuff nor my body. But what we're saying is somehow it does have a right to do things just because I existed on this patch of dirt. You know, see, tell me, what do you think the government gets a? How does the government has a right to control on what color the tint of my car is, or how?
Because I know. So this is an idealistic concept.
Mm-hmm.
It's not perfect, but in theory, it's because we decided as a society that the safety of all of us is critical upon the color of that tint. Now, I agree
So
with
you
you.
decided
That's a
that, but
stupid
what
law.
I'm asking is, what gives you the right? So let's take it back to taxes. What gives government the right to my money?
Well, you are using the resources that we have all collectively pulled together, and you're using that to further your livelihood.
Sure,
So,
that
kind
the
of like the
government,
person,
but I don't
house
think
number 3 in the cul-de-sac who doesn't want to pay the security guard, but 1 and 2 have to pay it because they know they need it. You know
so.
what I mean?
But
Yeah,
so
yeah, but what that does, by the way, and I meant to address this earlier, is that if you live in a neighborhood of 3 houses, there's you, me, and AAA, and only 2 of us pay the security guards, then guess where that security guard's not patrolling at night because you didn't pay him? That's it. That's as simple as it gets. And by the way, like the current legal system is much, much worse than that because instead of that, you're getting money forcibly taken out of your pocket, and you have a police system that is strictly reactive in 99% of cases.
Oh,
They,
100% agree with you, man. Yeah.
Yes, it is a reactive system. What happens is you get
Yeah.
robbed and then you report it to the police. The police aren't just patrolling your
Yeah.
street to stop robbers.
right, the police
Listen,
can
I rarely call the police. I mean,
the
it
police
would
can
be
walk. They can walk
risky.
into your house, shoot you in the head for boiling some water, and you still
Yeah.
and the people around the people your family members, they still have to pay for their services.
Yeah,
So
that's true. I mean, I
in
get
our
it. There's things
system,
I don't want to pay for.
so
I don't want to pay
but here's the
for
thing.
the
But here's the thing.
Israeli war, the Iraq war, the
Sure,
Afghan
but here's the thing.
war, the
So
police in
and so
many circumstances.
Anna, and I'm sure you can agree. We probably agree with her sentiment. She was saying that we have some say in what the government does, and what I was pointing, I was kind of arguing this in the chat. We don't, but with the free market, you would. So if the
I'm not
security
sure I
guard,
understand how.
so if the security guard was going around racially profiling people, shooting people, planting drugs on people, would you continue to pay that security guard, or would you hire someone else?
So you're telling me that after the security guard has shot someone and planted drugs on them, he's just got to find a new job? Or is
No.
he going to
Well,
face some kind of criminal justice?
in the government, in the system of government, after he's doing that, if the police doesn't take any action, you still got to pay for him. You still have to pay for their services, despite their officers providing.
You got to
really
pay for
shitty
him to
service.
go. You got to pay for him to go to prison.
No, a lot of times they don't go to prison.
A lot of times they don't, but we're improving as
but
a
you still- but what
society.
I'm
That's
saying
the
is-
whole
what I'm saying
Like,
is-
but
idea.
what ends up happening is, and this is insane, is that the cop gets like desk work for 2 months, and then you're still paying.
Yeah, the
cop's
police
salary.
system needs massive reform. I agree with you on that
No,
one.
but
I mean, like
the
the police
problem
system is kind of a takeaway from an older system.
But here's the problem: is the police? You have to pay for their services, regardless of the level of service they're providing. If it's good service, you got to pay for it. If it's horrible service, you got to pay for it. If they're going around shooting people and racially profiling and all that kind of stuff, you still got to pay for it.
Sure, but I mean, like, even in a private situation, why wouldn't you have to have the same situation?
You could just fire them.
You've only got. How are you going to afford to even pay for somebody, like just a private person, to just protect you all day?
Just to throw
you can really afford to pay some other person's whole career?
A solution to this right now. I happen to have a perfect solution for this. As of 2020, now there's probably more recent statistics, but as of 2020, the average security guard in the United States made $16 an hour. So if he patrols
I
8
can't
houses,
afford to pay someone that, man.
and then I'm not asking you to pay that. If you live in a community of 8 houses and the security guard has to walk around 8 houses, and he does this 5 hours during the night, you're paying this dude at $16 an hour, a whopping $80. That's $10 a house. You
Sure,
right
but what if
now,
house number 7 doesn't
hang
want
on,
to pay for it?
Let me finish real quick. You right
Okay.
now pay about 30% of your paycheck to the American government in taxes. Take 30% of your paycheck back and do whatever the hell you want with it.
Well, if you didn't have that backup infrastructure that the police have, then it would be
No,
pretty
you're
easy
only
to one
doing
off that
this-
one
look,
guy.
this is-
And then,
And you'd have, this is the point I was trying to make to you, and this is the point I was trying to make to the chat. You're only saying that because you're living in a state. You're only saying that because that's the way it is. What we're saying is if we set up a world, like if we had our own world number 2 that did not have the American government ever, and we were going to set up a society, then that's not a question that you would come up with because that's not a problem you'd be facing. It's only because of the American government taking your money that you're facing that problem now.
so what do you do now? I mean, like, all right, so I could imagine that we're living in a place with a much lower population, you know, something maybe is far in the past that doesn't exist anymore, and maybe a village or something, and think that could work, you know, but we currently have issues of sprawl, you know, we have issues of, I mean, we've been living in this country, you know, we left feudalism a while ago, we've been living under capitalist society for a long time. So what do you do with our current situation? What can house number 7 do to pull themselves out of this, like scenario that you just presented? Because you're also presenting a situation.
I mean, I'm not trying to be rude, but what do
as if
homeless
we-
people do? What do homeless people do to pull themselves out of their situation now? Because
Well, a lot of times they don't. A lot of
helping them.
times homeless people live homeless forever. The cheapest
and
way
the
to deal with the
government sure as hell
homelessness
ain't
problem
helping
is
them,
to provide everyone with housing. It's
What
way
you're
cheaper.
saying, and like I
and
hate to break it down
it
this
gives
way. and
everyone
I'm
an
not- I'm not-
opportunity to get a job.
Well, I hate to break it down this way, and I'm not trying to sound like an asshole because neither AAA nor I grew up in a wealthy home,
You're good,
and
man.
both of us can
Sure.
verify that. But what you're saying is that people with money have more money than people that don't have money,
True.
and that's
a
correct.
fact.
That's correct. But that doesn't change anything. I'm able to afford things now that I couldn't afford 10 years ago. I'm able to afford things now my parents couldn't afford. And what that
Yeah.
does for me and how I can spend my money, and just like AAA pointed out, is that he lives in an area with private security. When AAA and I grew up, we lived in an area in which we could call the cops and they wouldn't show up. So that doesn't help him. But now he lives in a better community because he's built himself up. He's built his wealth up.
Yeah.
Now he lives in a community with private security. But the government sure
I
as
think
hell
what-
didn't help
yeah.
him get there.
So I think what you're saying is that the wealthy would benefit if we didn't have all these, you know, societal infrastructures in place. I actually
Everybody would
disagree with that.
benefit. No,
I don't think that's the case.
Everybody-
Everybody
Just
would
the wealthy.
benefit.
But
Well,
by the
definitely
way,
not the
I'm
people that
not
can't afford the
wealthy
security
now.
guard,
I'm not
though.
wealthy
So-
now. But if the government gave me back 30% of my paycheck, I'd be slightly wealthier.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
We would
And
all,
to
like-
be clear,
but what I'm
being,
saying is
being wealthy
okay.
is going to obviously give you advantages over other people. Removing the government isn't going to change that. You remove the government, as a wealthy person is still going to have advantages over a non-wealthy person. So again, we're not trying to create heaven on earth. We're just saying have a system that doesn't violate people's consent to exist.
So let me
So
let me just throw a little bit of what I think is kind of realism into this concept. And I don't mean to put it in a way that sounds rude or something, but I think that it's a misconception that I believe that wealthier folks might trend towards thinking that if we got rid of certain what do they call them, safety net things, they would do better because they're paying less money in taxes and stuff. I actually don't think that's true, and the reason is that when you have a middle and lower classes that are better off, you're going to, everybody on the upper end is actually going to do a little bit better. And if you got rid of all of those things that keep the middle and lower classes supported, the upper classes are going to collapse. And we've seen this happen in Florida, where Ron DeSantis, again, who I gave a little bit of praise to earlier for his environmental good deeds. One thing that he did is he reached out to all of the immigrants, and a lot of them left. And like, again, I work in this industry.
Immigrants are a problem because of government.
That are, I see job sites that are completely vacant. I see contractors that are saying, "Oh yeah, my work left because of that bill that Ron DeSantis passed, where it's basically saying if you hire an immigrant, you're screwed." I mean, if you don't have people kind of building up the ladder from the bottom up, you're going to suffer. Even if you're in those higher classes, it's not going to be, like I remember if you read your history about France, that upper society, it's not capable of standing on its own when the lower classes are not doing well.
Okay,
don't worry, I got you guys.
That is not anarchy. That was so.
I got you guys. I got you.
No, but what I'm saying is like just cutting taxes for the. All right, think about this.
You're giving, but
they cut taxes.
The examples that you're giving against voluntarism are examples that only apply to government. Like even this thing we talk about with immigration. Immigration is only a problem because of government. Because immigrants that come over here and they start taking resources from people through like social safety nets, through welfare programs, without actually contributing to the economy. If it wasn't for the existence of the state, that wouldn't be the case. Immigrant come over here, okay, in order to live, you'd have to contribute. You have to do work. You have to buy. You have to like
pay your taxes,
produce stuff, right? Well, they may or may not pay their taxes, but sometimes they come over here and they're still getting some of the benefits from the social benefits. So like that's only a problem because of the state. That wouldn't
I disagree. It's a problem because of the state.
Say it again.
No, I disagree. I disagree. It's a problem because of the state. But I think I understand what you're saying, that the state infrastructure makes it difficult for state immigrants into our society, as opposed to
not difficult to assimilate. So okay, we're talking about, let's say I come over here, I'm not a citizen. I'm not even able to work. If I get harmed, I'm still treated at your hospital. I don't pay for it. Obviously, who pays for it? The state, right? I might be getting some benefits. Have a kid over here or something like that. The kid goes to the school, going to the public school. Not doing this at free, but just free to me. But it's a cost. It's a burden to the taxpayers. That's because of the government. If that didn't exist, any immigrant that came over here, they have to provide for themselves. It wouldn't be a problem then.
So let me ask you, no, I don't mean to change subjects. Did you want to kind of wrap this one up on immigration, and then I have just like one last thing that I want to say.
I have one. Can I put one word in, and then you can say immigration, and I'm good with closing it? My one word is bourgeoisie. That is the word that no one wanted to pronounce. It's that was the elite class in France that was over. The government was overthrown, and then the French Revolution. This is the bourgeoisie. Anyway, that's that. Finish on immigration. I'm good with wrapping it up here, guys, because I have to go in a couple minutes as well.
Yeah. So, did you want to say something? And I guess I can finish, or whatever you prefer.
Oh, that's it. I think we can give you last word of the show. We try to do that with every guest.
Oh,
say your piece. We'll try not to interrupt you. Then we'll wrap up. But say whatever you want to say, man. You got a couple minutes. You can talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Okay,
All right.
Jesse. Okay.
Yeah,
Jesse's
go
comment.
ahead,
You
man.
cracked me up. Oh, well, I want to give him last word. So Jesse said, "Love you guys. Outside of private individuals owning nuclear weapons, I don't think I've ever truly disagreed with you. But this just sounds like corporatized feudalism at the end of the day." So, all right, Jesse, bro, come on the show. We can talk about that. I don't think
It's
nuclear
actually no
weapons.
Jesse.
Say it again.
It's actually no Jesse, or you've met Jesse.
I'll do. Oh, have I? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, you come on the show. We can meet again, and let's talk about that. We talk about the nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons would only exist if it wasn't for government. Anna, I'm not.
Pretty busy. He's working on a
I'm not.
PhD.
Oh, word. Okay, dope. Oh, he's pretty smart then. So, Anna, you're more than welcome to come on the show too. We can. I'll put the email in the chat. Email us if y'all are interested. Like I'm down to have this conversation again with anybody. Okay, my bad. You to have. Go ahead.
That's totally good, man. Yeah, so just my opinion, just to kind of summarize, I mean, I think that the reason why we have a regulatory state is because it protects the environment, it protects businesses, it protects property, it protects livelihood. Without some kind of a regulatory state, you're going to have anarchy, and I believe that that's a good connotation for my friends on the other side of the debate spectrum. But for me, that doesn't sound good for numerous reasons. One, when it comes to the environment, it's very lucrative to short-term impact the environment. However, that's very costly for everyone that is around you. With a criminal regulation system, you've got to have kind of a state, you've got to have civil courts, you've got to have criminal courts. It's not going to be ideal ever in any system, but at least we can have some kind of ideal to work towards. And when we all kind of band together to try to create a system that is fair, at least we can get it to being more fair than you would see in some type of a mob justice or vigilante system. And three, it's actually something that we didn't really get to. It's a lot cheaper to do things with the state. For instance, universal healthcare is significantly cheaper than private insurance.
Because other people
When
are paying
you
for it. But go ahead. I'm sorry. I should interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, yeah, of course. I mean, well, there's always other people paying for it, whether you have someone who goes to the ER because they don't have insurance, and we decided at some point that we need laws that protect people who they've got shot in the chest or they need some type of treatment. We decided at some point as a society we don't want to let those folks die just because they don't have money in their pocket. Like someone shows up, bleeding from the throat because they just got stabbed. We decided, well, just because they don't have a credit card, that doesn't mean they should just bleed out. But because of that fact that we decided that, we need a system that makes it to where it's affordable. And obviously, studies have shown that it's cheaper when you consolidate those costs into a tax as opposed to into some kind of a private insurance system. But I think that one thing that we just can't get away from is that the regulatory crisis of our generation is climate change. Whether we like it or not, this is a situation that we're going to have to deal with for every generation preceding ours. Even if we were to perfectly regulate it now, it's still going to be an issue for hundreds of years, just based on the science. And, I tend to think in a scientific way. I tend to think about what's going to happen when we make certain moves. And that's just an issue that if we don't address it, it's going to just get worse. And we can't think about things on the short term. we have to think in a long-term strategic way about how to build our society if we want to survive more than a couple of 100 years. That's it.
Appreciate it, man. I think if society ends in a few hundred years or so, it's gonna be through government, nuclear war, or something like that. But okay, I appreciate you coming on, dude. You're more than welcome to come back on anytime you want if you want to discuss something else or even discuss this again, man. I'll be down. I have fun. We don't usually get to discuss anarchy a whole lot. I think we've only discussed it maybe like twice on the show. We had Godless Engineer on once, and we had a guy from Israel whose name I forget. So, yeah, man, I appreciate you coming on. Fasad, do you
All right,
have
guys.
anything you want to say?
Nah, I got nothing, guys. I appreciate you coming on, man.
Okay, cool. All right, thanks, guys. We don't have a guest for next week yet. I'm gonna be looking for somebody. If not, we might just do a response video